Okay, my internet connection has not been up to snuff recently. I'm going to get through this as quickly as humanly possible, and just give my thoughts on the fourth DreadX collection. Hold on a minute. Video capture, audio capture. Yeah, and I don't know how much time I have in general to talk about this anyway. Thankfully, less games to speak about, so this shouldn't go on for too long. Same as usual, A, B, C, D, and F. F means I really did not like it to a significant degree. D is sort of a disappointing dislike, where I can kind of get behind some of the ideas, I just don't think they're fully executed well. C is either a 50-50 split between great and terrible, or mediocre, or not that great, or good. It has a wide range, or good but not necessarily exceptional or great. B is very good. A is great, doesn't have to be perfect. Starting off with The Hunt, which is a focus on starting off this listing for The Hunt, which is focused on first-person shooters, is Axis Mundi. I have the listings now in alphabetical order, so I won't be jumping around too far. And I gotta say, I really liked this one. This one is definitely in the B tier. This is basically a game about a ghost photographer. It's similar to another series I really enjoy by the name of Fatal Frame, especially on the PS2s. Recently there was a Made in the Black Water release on Wii U and PC. But basically this is a ghost photographer who goes to a mall outlet that is in the middle of construction, and has to de-haunt the location using his camera to take pictures of ghosts to fight them, while at the same time putting them to rest. I felt like, in terms of the visual style, mechanically, in terms of the satisfaction of gameplay, and even the storytelling, was really touching. You go into this game as sort of a typical first-person shooter, horror-styled game, and by the end of it, you get a really nice... The way it all concludes and how it progresses, it very clearly shows a nice dichotomy between the fast-paced action and the more somber reflection on what these people have lost, in terms of how that led to them becoming these vengeful spirits in the first place, and sort of righting the wrongs of the past in order to fix the future and put people at ease. I felt like the game did a really good job at handling those themes in a very straightforward way for such a short experience, with the only real downside or annoying bits involving if you accidentally or purposefully have to go back into areas for, say, collectibles, or if you accidentally go back into an area on accident and want to back out, you can't. You have to go all the way through the level and play through it again. That was a little annoying and not very convenient. I do like how there are extra collectibles in terms of finding lore on certain ghost types that the game was inspired by, to a certain degree. But having to go back, if you miss one, having to go back through a level all the way through just to get that one, including the same objectives, just to get that one correct picture, to get the little lore tidbit you want, is a little annoying. Not gonna lie, is a little annoying. And the gameplay, as much as I really loved it for the most part, can get a little... I guess there wasn't... I kind of feel like this one rounds itself off really well, and yet at the same time I kind of wished it was a little longer. I wish there was a bit more to it, or that it got... Or I'm hoping that this is another example of a game that needs a follow-up, or an expanded upon version. Kind of like what's happening actually recently with The Outsiders. Outsiders is getting a re-release, or like a new take on the same idea that's like a follow-up, I guess, to the first game, that is an expansion on the concept. It'll be interesting to see how that goes, and I hope Axis Mundi follows suit. In terms of how it ranks on the B ranking, I can easily say it's over Arcadotron Solipsis. Personally, I would even go so far as to put it over Summer Night. Would I put it over Sucker for Love and Don't Go Out? I would even go, actually, I take that back. I'll even go so far as to say that it's way ahead of Pony Factory, even. Not ahead of Toy Shop, though. Axis Mundi is not as frustrating to play at times as Toy Shop is on a few occasions, but once you get the hang of it, you kind of get used to it. The Toy Shop is such a twisted, interesting spin on the genre of the Lovecraftian genre, with so many different genre elements going on, with a really, really interesting story. So a lot of that holds up and sort of lifts the faults. Like it's basically, it's enough to where with the Toy Shop, it's enough to where the faults don't outweigh what makes that game so special. Whereas Axis Mundi, by comparison, is a lot more. It's not quite as ambitious as the Toy Shop, with a few nagging areas here and there in terms of pacing, and the fact that it doesn't feel quite as... It feels fleshed out enough, and it feels complete enough by comparison. But for me personally, more so the surprise factor and the feeling of constantly having to be on my toes for the Toy Shop compared to Axis Mundi is why I put the Toy Shop slightly ahead of Axis Mundi. But Axis Mundi is up there. It is absolutely, without question, a B, and a much-deserved one. Real quick, let me check the stream quality. Hopefully, yeah, that's working. Okay, just making sure. Moving on, we have Black Relic. Where is it on this listing? This is a third-person shooter that I believe had to have been at least partially inspired somewhat by Resident Evil 4 specifically. But you basically play as a priest who has been tasked with protecting a relic. Anything past that point, I'm not going to say. This is from the same developers, if I remember correctly, as Hand of Doom, and also another game that I will be covering or looking into from the third DreadX collection, which is, I believe, Chip's Tips. If I remember correctly, they're also the developers of that. And I gotta say, Black Relic is easily, I would argue, a C. And to be specific, I would actually go so far as to put it ahead of Mr. Bucket Told Me To in terms of gameplay. Not so much in terms of writing, though. I think Mr. Bucket has slightly more interesting and better, more engaging writing than Black Relic, but Black Relic has a few interesting surprises mixed in. Black Relic is fun. It's fairly well designed. But there are some issues here and there. For one, you have infinite ammo drops between areas, which is nice and convenient, but at the same time makes it a little too easy. Sometimes enemy ranges, in terms of how they activate, are somewhat wonky. You'd think they'd be able to start firing at you from longer ranges, especially for ranged enemies, and they don't. The two boss battles that this game has are, quite frankly, terrible. It's literally just run from one position, shoot, run from one position, shoot, run from one position awkwardly, shoot. So it requires some level of challenge, but not that much. You don't really take that much in terms of damage, and you can pray at any point to heal, and that's fine. That's a cool mechanic. And then on top of that, the most frustrating element mostly boils down to, especially enemies that are on higher planes and that are further away. If you try to fire at them, the game will not register. Even if you hit dead on, the game will not register the hit unless you're within a certain range, even if you can see the shot heading straight for the enemy. So you end up wasting arrows, having to run back to a position or a box where you have to get more arrows, and then, bolts, getting more bolts, and then firing yet again. So, a little frustrating, not gonna lie. And it does get a little repetitive after a while, but it is fun. It's still fairly well designed. I love how there is a reload animation that takes quite a while to get going before you can fire off your shot, adding to the tension. The visual design is great. The sound design is quite good. It's still a fun game. Not quite as ambitious as something like Hand of Doom or even Chip's Tips, but still a solid title in and of itself that's fun and well worth the playthrough. You know what? I was going to go in alphabetical order, but I'm saving one specific one for last, because I feel like I could be here all day talking about it. House of Unrest. Where is it? There it is. House of Unrest is about a priest that goes to a house to exorcise someone. It's a first-person Resident Evil style shooter. And I am putting this one pretty firmly in the C tier, and to be specific, I'm putting it ahead of To the End of Days, but I'm actually going to put it behind Mr. Bucket Told Me To. This game is good. Do not let the C ranking fool you. It's got a solid visual design, some fairly solid sound design, when the sound design does come into play and is utilized really well. Level design's pretty solid. I wouldn't say the story's okay. The story's okay. The ending is quite hilarious. I kind of love how it ends. It very much throws the seriousness out the window. But overall, I don't really think... I was really looking forward to this one, but this one ended up being more frustrating and less interesting to play than what I was hoping it would be. For one, the sound design, I love how you also have a cross that you can use to sort of burn away areas that are, like, infected. It really adds to a sense of... It reminds me of stuff like Power Wash Simulator or another game I played called The Gunk, in that you can go through areas and clean them up, so to speak, but at the same time you can light up areas because it's very dark. The lighting in this game is so freaking dark at times you can barely see anything, and I like that. It adds to the tension. The enemy designs are grotesque, but the gameplay. Okay, so this game can be fairly challenging at times, but not necessarily for the right reasons. The biggest issue being the sound design, which enemies can sort of sneak up on you without you hearing them because they practically have no sound design attached to them. So everything else is working properly sound design-wise, mood music and everything like that, movement, but when it comes to the enemies, they can sneak up on you without you hearing them, because they don't have any, from what I remember of playing this, they don't really have any sound attached to them when they sneak up on you. So you get into a lot of frustrating positions where the game will start spawning even more enemies on top of you, or areas that you've already been to, and you just don't hear them. Unlike a lot of other survival horror games where sound is important, where you need to be able to hear the enemies, you just can't hear them in this one. And to top that off, you have the fact that the enemies are fairly one note. There's not really very much any variation except for the two boss battles the game has. And the boss battles, one of them is just okay but mostly funny, and then the other is ridiculously easy if all you do is just park yourself outside of the room and shoot at it. So the game's frustratingly hard in a few areas, like with enemies not having any sound attached to them, but it's also way too easy in other areas. As another example, the guns that you have in the game have no ammunition cap. It's infinite ammo all the way through, which does keep the pacing moving, but at the same time there isn't much of a reason to really worry too much when you have pretty much near infinite ammo. So there's not... I mean, it's good though. It was a fun playthrough, just not a great one like I was hoping, especially with the sort of PS1 styled visual design. I was really hoping. And the sense of unease and dread was really solid, but I was really hoping it would just be a better game overall. It's not as frustrating to play, though, as To the End of Days. To the End of Days has a problem where it's really frustrating at times to shoot at certain enemies and deal with certain enemy types, because of how much damage they take and also their pathfinding, how much damage you take when they hit you, how quickly they run at you. That doesn't happen with House of the Unrest, thankfully, so that's not really an issue you have to worry about. That and To the End of Days feels a little rushed in areas where House of the Unrest feels more deliberately paced out. So I feel like the overall execution is a little better than To the End of Days, even though To the End of Days was still quite fun. So yeah. And then moving on to one that I was really looking forward to, because I'm really looking forward to eventually also playing Golden Light, which is what this developer went on to make. Apparently he has other games, I haven't played them yet. And that would be Rows of Meat. This is a rather strange and disgusting at times, downright revolting game about a man who goes fishing I'm going to try my hardest to try to explain or elaborate on what I think is happening in the plot. You play as a guy who goes fishing, and you fish out a woman's shoe out of the ocean. And then from there, you are grabbed by a giant meat hand and brought to an island made of meat. And from there, you meet a woman called Rose, which these meat creatures and beings all seem to worship. And from there, she basically tries to help you escape the island. Anything past that point, it's interesting. I guess the best way I can describe the plot is a man being sucked into a world against his will that all revolves around one person that may or may not have at one point wanted to be worshipped and is now regretting it. It's a really interesting story that is rather opaque, rather nebulous in terms of what it's trying to convey, and it sort of expects you to kind of piece things together yourself or interpret things, especially with the ending and the gameplay. The gameplay. First of all, I have to give props to this game. Before I even rank it, I have to give props to this game in terms of, on a technical level, I have no idea, with the time limit this developer had, how they were able to pull this off. I have no clue. I haven't looked up any of like the making of or behind the scenes stuff or anything like that. I have no clue how this developer, who has to be talented, has to be really talented, was able to pull off this type of craft with the type of shaders and limitations that they were working with. Basically, when you get to the island, you start getting bombarded with certain areas and sections that are sort of semi-generated or randomly generated, but they all sort of form cohesively into progression that you have to work through. But it's so disorienting. And then on top of that, you have a woman's foot and a shoe that you throw as a weapon with explosive barrels at enemies or towards buildings. If you need to climb, you throw them out and they like form and sort of like bend and twist themselves into whatever shape they feel like, and you can climb and scale those. And then you can also blow them up. There are ammo drops, similar. It's actually more akin to a survival horror game since you have limited ammunition, but it's kind of like Resident Evil 4 in the sense that if you blow up certain enemies, that every once in a while they'll drop ammunition or supplies for you. But man, this game, on the one hand, the sheer level of creativity on display is magnificent, but on the other hand, it also comes at the price of, I'm going to rank it in the C category, it comes at the price of the game itself at times being incredibly frustrating to play. Just so frustrating on a few occasions. It's somewhere in the C category. Where would I put it? Because of the semi-random nature of how things, even enemies, certain enemies that will spawn, they'll spawn in like different sizes with different attack patterns, but sometimes they'll spawn right on top of you or right near you. Other times they'll spawn further away. You're constantly on edge on when these monstrosities are gonna basically jump you, or whether they'll actually come near you and start attacking you, because they, much like the legs you throw, they fold and bend and twist into different shapes as well to fling themselves at you to hit you. And you're basically running for your life trying to get at a certain range and angle to throw your legs out to hopefully spawn an explosive barrel to shoot that and then damage them or kill them instantly. But it gets so chaotic at times that it's honestly kind of hard to keep up with, and it gets especially frustrating when you have to try to climb these things to get to objectives. One example that I had was, or a few examples were, you had to get to objectives on rooftops, and these buildings are like 2-3 stories tall. So you have to throw out multiple legs to form a bridge, but the bridge will sometimes sort of contort into shapes that you don't need, so you'll have to end up shooting the bridge to blow it all up, to reform it again, while enemies are still spawning on you constantly. And then on top of that, sometimes you'll just get stuck in geometry. You'll get stuck midway through buildings if you time your jump too badly. An enemy will glitch through the building, kill you, because everything in this reality is malleable, so enemies can hit you through buildings. You'll die, and then the game, it's almost as if the designer knew that this was frustrating at the last second and was kind of like, okay, might need to make this a little easier, because the checkpoints will actually push you forward a bit. If you die, you can't technically die and get a game over. The game will actually kind of push you forward a little bit to your objective, so that way you're never actually losing progress, but it also doesn't really feel like progress being gained. It makes sense for the themes of the story and what's going on, and mechanically it's sound, but it also makes it a little too easy in order to compensate for the frustrating difficulty at times. And then the ending is a little too abrupt and too confusing, and I kind of wonder if I need to play Golden Light to figure out or fully understand what this is, because I believe the character from Golden Light is the same woman from this game as well, that you're going after. She's getting, I think, her own free spin-off game as well. So I wonder if this is all connected to a larger story, and maybe playing Golden Light will clear things up. This game, it's so interesting, because this was the one I really wanted to play ever since I was introduced to this game through Neocranium's video when he was playing Golden Light, the Tomboy Supremacy video. So I was really curious to see what more the developer had, and I was really looking forward to this one. And while I do appreciate what the game is going for, and on a technical level, it's astounding, astonishing what was able to be accomplished on a technical level. In terms of the moment-to-moment gameplay, it can be needlessly frustrating at times, in a way that some of these other games don't quite, aren't quite so. So I'm kind of, for now, I'm going to put it right in the middle of C tier, because I feel like that's the most appropriate spot, because I want to rank it higher, but there were so many times where I honestly wanted to rank it lower, so it's kind of in this weird middle zone where I really enjoyed it, it's worth playing, but it is very frustrating, even compared to some of the other more frustrating elements of even some of the games from D and F tier. But definitely worth a playthrough and interesting. Okay, gonna check. This is taking a lot longer than I expected. Again. Serafixial. This is from the developer of, moving on, from the developer of, in the second collection's Arcadultra. This one is about a father who receives a letter from his daughter, who is mournfully regretting running away from him to join a cult, and he has to go after her. And this one is basically a moment-to-moment, just shoot the enemies, move through the level, very straightforward game, very linear game. And where is it on here? There it is. This one I am also going to give a C. I'm going to give this one a C. And in terms of how much I like it, yeah, I wouldn't put it over Rows of Meat. Below House of Unrest? Maybe? I'm not sure. Probably below House of Unrest. But still a solid title. I love, much like Arcadultra, I love somewhat some of the surreal elements of horror in this one. I actually found the story to be fairly engaging, despite it being so simplistic. I love how it ends. Much the same way as Arcadultra's two endings. I really love the ending to this one. Feels very tragic, and appropriately so. I also love the sense of mystery and build-up when you go to this location. Because there's sort of a... I love how it toys around with just the surreal cosmic horror elements where, when you would imagine if you're going to a cult, you'd be going to an island or a compound or something, but no. You go out onto a submarine and go down an infinite ladder, and once you get to the bottom, you reach this world underneath the submarine, almost underneath the sea, but it's not the real world. I love the sense of scale in this game in terms of it. Even though it's so linear, you feel like you're trapped. Much like Arcadultra, you feel like you're trapped in the playground of a much stronger being. that is toying with you. And I like that. The moment-to-moment gameplay also, much like a few of the other games in here, is sort of semi-similar to, say, the likes of Resident Evil or Resident Evil 4 specifically, where enemies will spawn, you'll kill them, they drop loot, and they drop ammo, and or health packs, and you use that to fight your way through. I like some of the more, I like the sort of bio-organic weaponry on display. Like an electric gun, like a pistol that sort of shoots living bolts. But at the same time, I gotta say, there's a lack of enemy variety in this one. The sound design is just okay. Much like Arcade Ultra, there's a lot of unnecessary and overly done jump scares on a few occasions. In terms of, it's a little too linear. I kind of wish there was more of a chance to explore this world, because you'll see stuff in the distance that's very interesting to think about, but you never really get there. It's mostly just moment to moment arena shooting. The final boss is a cool change up, but it's a little too repetitive and it's fairly easy once you kind of get the pattern down. And then sometimes the game will sort of repeat segments, like you'll just get through segment by segment by segment, and they'll introduce new enemy types, but not too many, and they're not too difficult to take down once you get the patterns down. So it's a solid game though. Like it was solid. It was solid fun. I enjoyed Ceros, but I don't think I would put it above Arcade Ultra because, simply put, I think Arcade Ultra, despite having a much higher concentration of jump scares, also had much better audio design and a much better sense of pacing, and I found the story to be more intriguingly weird and, by the end of it, once you kind of realize what's going on, more intriguingly twisted, whereas Ceros is a lot more straightforward. And with Arcade Ultra, I didn't really know what I was getting into. Like, every moment I felt like I was on edge, and I wasn't sure how much it was going to, like, escalate. Whereas with Ceros, it was a lot more predictable where it was going with, so I didn't quite engage with it as much, ironically enough, as Arcade Ultra. But it was still a solid title. And now on to the second best game. It was second best game on this one, this collection easily. Ook Tennis 64. This one is an A. This is an easy A. If you've seen other YouTubers play through it, it should be kind of understandable why me and many others might consider this to be of such high standing. This is a game about a hunter who is tasked by someone to basically investigate the local wildlife, kill them, and take pictures of them, as proof of what's going on to the local wildlife, which is mutating in ways that are unexplainable. And this is kind of like... this game is so cool. It's basically trying to ape or imitate an older Nintendo 64 title, where each section is, you go stage by stage and just complete the objectives, but you also unravel a story and a mystery and just world building and storytelling as you go along, as you just do typical hunting scenarios. But this game is awesome. Great controls. It looks great. It's amusing. It's funny. It's charming. It's got great sound and visual design. It runs excellently. It has a really solid sense of humor up until it starts getting... the tension gradually starts to escalate, and even then, hold on, I'm being texted. Okay. It does a really good job of balancing humor, a humorous, playful side with real, tangible horror elements, and a great sense of build-up. I love how you manage your ammunition. Very old school in terms of going from location to location to look for ammo drops or health drops, which are like coffee cups or flowers that you eat. You break barrels sometimes that will or won't have extra ammo in them. The shooting elements feel really solid and just like a great sense of a punch. The enemies that you fight are aggressive. They're a little easy to take down in areas in certain regards, and they're a little bullet spongy at times. But the sense of dread and buildup as you are getting closer and closer and closer to these enemies is tangible, and I love that. And then on top of that, I love the ending. I love the ending to this one. It feels like the ending has a great little sort of surprise, and then on top of that, has a really surprisingly tragic. It's a surprisingly tragic ending for what is otherwise a fairly light-hearted, humorous, but also horrific scenario that the character is going through, and I really love how they handled that. A really good juxtaposition of tones that you don't really see too often. And then on top of that, once you beat the game, you have even more to go. There are cheat codes, and you can play through other sections of the game again with cheat codes that change things up a little bit for little surprises. And that's fun to play around with too. So, yeah, this one is easily, just for sheer fun factor. For sheer fun factor, this one's an A. Now, as for where I would rank it on here, that's a good question. It's probably better, I would say, overall than the hub game, the Mansion from DreadX Collection 2. But would I put it above Charlotte's Exile? I don't know about that, because, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say I think Charlotte's Exile, for me at least, was the more engaging title and experience, but Utena does have excellent production values and quality towards it. That, and I love how Charlotte's Exile has, it's very modular. You can speed run through it really quick. There's different ways to get to the endings. There are multiple endings, and it's not quite to the same level as the Diving Bell, which, on a personal level, I felt like the Diving Bell as a psychological horror is top-notch. Absolutely top-notch. And does a really good job. And still, Shatter is probably up. For now, Shatter is my favorite. We'll get to the other one I really enjoy, though, in 1 minute. One listing on here that I would consider a game in and of itself that isn't listed on here for me to utilize, though, is the hub game. The hub game, which I'm just going to dub The Hunt. Much like DreadX Collection 2 and 3, you have a hub game that connects to the stories of all the other hub games, all the way back to 1, that follows a woman that is going to a research facility to discover what happened to her sister, and I believe her mother as well. Oh, wait, no, yeah, I think it was just her mother. I apologize. And she's going there to find out, what happened to her, what happened to the research facility. It's a continuation of the events from 1 all the way through 3, where basically something, I'm not going to specify too much for spoilers, but something happened and a multiverse sort of opened up, and our world was shaped by these creatures that can now come and go freely, and so humanity has kind of adapted to these scenarios. And I really liked this one. I would also refer to it, besides The Hunt, as like Arc 2, because you go to this research facility called Arc 2. This is basically, hold on, check on the stream quality. This is basically like the equivalent, this game's equivalent of The Thing. And every game is sort of built around this central hub idea of hunting or first-person shooting. And you basically have to try to stop an entity, or this being, from outwitting you as you go section by section, discover what happened in the facility, and basically try to stop this entity from getting the upper hand on you. And I gotta say, I don't like this one actually as much. I was slightly disappointed in this one. I don't like it as much as the hub game in, I would say, 2, and maybe even 3, although there's more going on gameplay-wise in this one than, say, 3 does. And the tension levels are much like 2, the level of tension in this one is actually quite high, especially starting out. Starting out, I was not willing to progress and explore this facility. there's a really great sense of knowing that you're in danger and knowing the dangers around, but not really knowing how to handle it. And it really isn't up until the second half where there are some questionable decisions, I would say, that happen in terms of storytelling and in terms of pacing, where it feels a little too abrupt. That kind of brings it down for me. But it ends off with a really strong cliffhanger for what might be happening or going on in the hub game story of DreadX Collection 5. But we'll see how that goes. And it does tell a fairly engaging enough plot in and of itself. I especially love the world building in terms of the radio that you have, the CD radio that picks up on a broadcast station that is sort of taking in calls from people who have been affected by the events of DreadX Collection 1 going forward. To really flesh out the world and sort of show the player how crazy things have gotten and how people are kind of adapting to it, or not adapting to it. It's really cool. I would say it's probably in the B category, though, as opposed to DreadX Collection 2's hub, which is definitely A category for me. So yeah, that one's B, and now on to the one that I might be here talking about for quite a while. The Fruit. The Fruit is one of the best games I think I've actually played, period. This game, before I even put it on the listing, this one I can assuredly say, without hesitation, is an A. It is a story about a man that you play as, I would say around the late 1700s, early 1800s, 1800s, who's received a letter from his would-be betrothed to basically, if I remember correctly, it was stay away, don't come back to, don't come back home or don't come to where I am. So you go investigating to see where he, what happened to him, where he went, and you find that the town he's at has been afflicted by a fruit that people are eating. They're eating this fruit that is like unlocking arcane knowledge within them, but it's also driving them insane. And there's people that are like holed up in a church. They basically barricaded themselves in because they can't really deal with the situation, and so it sort of becomes your task to deal with the situation. And this one is basically sort of like a first-person equivalent to Resident Evil 4. Again, a lot of these games remind me to a certain degree of some elements of Resident Evil 4, but with this one it's laid on really thick, but with more of a gothic horror supernatural vibe spin towards it, and a really cool weapon system. Oh my god, this game is so cool. Where do I even begin? It has a really solid, a typical but solid setup. It has great build-up. It has even elements of semi-non-linear gameplay where you can go to certain sections ahead of time, gather clues that will point you in the right direction for areas that you need to go to progress, and then progress your way through to that location. When enemies are killed, with only one exception in one area, when enemies are killed, they stay dead permanently. Unlike some of the other games in this collection, with a few exceptions, enemies stay permanently dead, and there's only a certain number of enemies within reason, which also makes the world feel more believable. It very much feels like you're going to a village with a set population that makes it feel all the more believable. The environmental storytelling is really good. The save system, in which you have to go from fireplace to fireplace at houses as a checkpoint system, is actually really good. Fighting enemies. Man, enemies hit hard in this game. You'll have enemies that rush you, and those tend to be pretty easy to deal with for the most part, but they hit hard, and then you've got enemies that can shoot at you, much like you can shoot at them. And they'll reload, they'll try to reposition. It's kind of hard to see at times because of how dark the location is. It's constantly raining, so sometimes you'll visually lose track of one target while another target is running at you. And when enemies shoot you, you're dead in 2 or 3 hits, so you have to move quick. And the mechanics, the shooting mechanics, The shooting mechanics in this game, oh my god, they're brilliant. They're brilliant. You have one weapon, which is sort of like a rifle, a single action rifle, but it's a brilliantly designed mechanic because it's from my understanding, from what I looked up, it's semi-historically accurate in that you have to actually, I don't even know how you'd be able to do this on a controller. I don't even think it's possible, but you have to like you have a limited amount of ammunition. So the gun itself only has a limited number of bullets that it can hold. So you can't pick up there's a limited amount of ammo you can use, and you can't pick up and utilize every piece of ammo you come across. So you have like a little ammo belt that you deal with. On top of that, you have a reload system where you have to sort of crank back a section, eject a shell, and then physically use your mouse to insert the separate shell, close it off, and then get ready to fire it. It's brilliant. It is absolutely brilliant what this does for tension. The sense of satisfaction when you fire off a shot, it sounds great. Enemies go down in one hit when you hit them with it. It's great, and that's not even counting what happens later on. Again, eventually you get a hold, without going into too many specifics, you get a hold of magic spells. Although it's a little limited, it's still satisfying to use, so it goes even further. On top of all of that, you have you have really good environmental storytelling, really solid writing. The voice acting is fantastic. Fantastic voice acting for what basically amounts to a little indie showcase game on a time limit, built on a time limit. The environmental design is brilliant. How everything connects together is really solid. The pacing is excellent. The only section I don't particularly care for is a section in which you have to go to a location and then run back, because certain enemies, without going into specifics, certain enemies you have to flip through book pages to then cast a spell to kill them, but they infinitely keep respawning in one specific area, so it gets really frustrating to have to kind of go back and forth with that while you're getting hit. And they can sort of come back around to you and hit you a lot quicker. That section was very frustrating. That's the only real downside to the game, is besides some performance issues. It's the only real downside to the game is that one section. Everything else, though, is so excellent. Such an excellent, excellent game. And the ending, or the endings, they're great. They make the game for me. The ending I chose felt appropriately somber. It's a really, really sad story, all things. It's very firmly in the realm of gothic, tragic horror. And it's great. It is. I cannot stress enough how engaging the writing is and how wrapped up you get in this game's story and gameplay. Like, it's so much fun to play. It's so engaging. It's so well crafted. With some of these other games, you kind of get the impression that maybe with a bit more work and polish they could have been better, or like with Rose of Meat, you feel like now that Golden Light's out, that I feel as though it may help better explain or elaborate on what Rose of Meat was trying to say or convey. Other games are getting, like, could have been better implemented. This one, though, I cannot for the life of me see this game getting any better than it is. This game achieves everything it sets out to do. Absolutely everything it sets out to do effectively. From its storytelling, to its world building, to its game design, to its pacing, to how it all wraps up and ends. This game, it doesn't need a follow-up. It doesn't need an expansion. It doesn't need anything else attached to it. It's perfect just the way it is. Or near perfect. It's not perfect, but it's about as close to perfect as humanly possible. And I'm going to go ahead and say, without a shadow of a doubt, it's one of, even though it's just one game in a collection, it's one of the best games I have ever played in my life, period. And I would be willing to reinstall the collection right now just to replay this one. And it's the best game out of all 4 of the collections I have played so far, it is the best game out of all of them. I'm putting it ahead of even Shatter. Because Shatter, as much as I love it, it's not really, it doesn't feel complete. It doesn't feel complete. It feels like a build-up to something a lot more fleshed out and interesting. And then on top of that, the developer has already moved on to Dread Delusion anyway. So there really isn't... I don't even know if Shatter's ever going to get expanded upon. But with the Fruit, and Outsiders is already getting an expansion, or like a different spin on the same idea. The Toy Shop, like, because I think the developer is working on the Outsiders and not the Toy Shop, like a follow-up to the Toy Shop, I don't even know if certain games like the Toy Shop will get further expanded upon or elaborated on. But the Fruit is so close to perfect, that it just feels like... It feels like you can take it out of the DreadX collection and sell it. Like, you can sell this for, like, a few dollars, $5 or something, and it would be worth the purchase. If this game, a few of these games are available, especially on itch, separate from the DreadX collection. So if you don't want to buy the collection and buy the individual games, you can get them. If this one, specifically, for anyone who actually watches this, if the Fruit is available on itch or other platforms to buy, just on its own, it's worth it. It's worth it for this collection, and it is worth it on its own to play. Easily. Out of any game in any of these collections I've played so far, it is the best, and it is well worth a standalone price point in and of itself. Excellent, excellent game. And with that, I gotta wind down. I'm done. And